Well, in Australia, we're in the middle of winter, and I thought I'd take this time to share my experiences of photographing birds since I've owned a digital SLR in 2007. And the gear that I've used has slowly progressed. It's gotten better, but I want to show you that gear at times doesn't really matter. It's technique, it's the way you use the gear that you have. You don't need the latest and greatest gear. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, because as our cameras and our lenses have become more advanced, the technology has increased so much that I feel at times that we've lost the ability to be a photographer, to rely on our experience, to rely on our knowledge of how to capture birds. In this day and age, we have cameras that can pre-capture. So as long as you've got your finger halfway pressed on the shutter button, the camera is getting to record. And as soon as you press the shutter button all the way down, it captures up to 1 to 2 seconds before you actually press the shutter button down. And this is called pre-capture. So you have a few images before you've pressed the shutter button. So for birds taking off, you've got the ability of actually getting that split second that you would have missed if you didn't have a camera that has that. And there's so many other features that modern cameras have that I feel we've become lazy. We're relying so much on the technology of the cameras these days. We have bird eye autofocus on so many cameras that can track a bird as it's going across the sky. We don't have to worry about making sure that we're tracking it exactly so that we keep that bird in focus. So I want to show you my experiences from the time that I've owned a digital SLR, which is in 2007, to now. Show you the cameras that I was using, show you the lenses that I was using, and show you that even though the technology has increased in the cameras, I've become a better wildlife photographer because I've spent so much time out in the field. I've learned more about how to capture birds, but that doesn't always correlate with the camera that I use. Because if I'm really being honest with myself, the camera that I have at the moment, the Nikon Z6 II, and a camera like I had quite a few years ago, the Nikon D7500, the way that I compose the image, the way that I track birds in the sky hasn't changed that much, because none of the cameras that I've owned have bird eye autofocus, have pre-capture. I still have to rely on my own knowledge, on my own ability to photograph birds. I'm not saying that all this technology is bad. What I'm saying is that these days we're relying at times too much on technology to take the photos. We're not relying on ourselves. We're not relying on learning. Okay, well, this is how I have to take the photo. This is how I have to frame the photo. Even if your camera has bird eye autofocus, should I just let the camera do the work, or should I still track the bird as it's going across the sky? Because if I'm tracking the bird, even if the camera has bird eye autofocus, I am going to get a better frame. I'm going to get the bird where I want in the frame. And this is what I want to show you today. Show you that it doesn't matter which camera you have. So let me show you now the cameras that I used, the cost, because you wouldn't believe the cost of these cameras when they first came out. 2007, I bought the Nikon D70S. It was a 6 megapixel camera, 3 frames per second, and it cost me $1,500. And I had bought a used Sigma 135-400 lens for $1,200 so I could take some wildlife images. Only 6 megapixel, but coming from film, it was great. I could actually take a photo and see straight away whether the photo was in focus or whether it was out of focus. Photographing birds in flight was nearly unheard of because the frame rate was so low. We were content with just photographing birds that weren't moving or just moving along the ground. Like this spinifex pigeon that I photographed out in Western Queensland when I travelled up north. Or these Electus parrots. The red one here is the female, the green one that is the male. These Electus parrots live in dense rainforests, and the female spends a lot of the breeding season in the nest. This is one of the rare species of birds that the colours are swapped In early 2008, I packed up my life in Australia and I moved to Thailand just for a personal change. And I lived in Thailand for 3 years. By then, I'd sold my Nikon D70S and I bought a Nikon D80. For quite a while after that, I just photographed landscapes. I photographed the people in Thailand. So my wildlife photography took a backstage. When we came back to Australia with my wife and we were raising our young daughter, and for a long time, all I did was teach photography, teach landscape photography, later on taught astrophotography. And it wasn't until 2015 that I decided to get back into wildlife photography. I didn't want to go out and spend a lot of gear because I wanted to see whether I still had that burning desire of photographing wildlife, of photographing birds. I hunted down and I found an inexpensive Nikon 75 to 300mm lens for only $250. And my camera, being the Nikon D7100, was a 24 megapixel, 6 frame per second camera for $1,500. And I'll show you here just a couple of images that I took with this camera. This first one here is a magpie geese just landing at Lake Eden. When you haven't been doing something for a while, you just forget the basic essentials. You're just like not in tune with that. So it was just getting back into the flow and seeing whether I could actually still take images of wildlife. And a bit later that year, I also got into portrait photography and I bought a Nikon 80 to 200mm f2.8 lens for portrait photography. But I found that this lens was also great for wildlife photography. Black swan here with the small cygnets just popping out of the side. Then in 2018, which was the Nikon D7500, this camera was 21 megapixel, would take photos at 8 frames per second, and it cost me in 2018 $1,800. I found a Takina 80 to 400mm lens on eBay for only $500. Now this lens wasn't that crash hot. Sure, it gave me the reach, but it had no VR. Imagine trying to take photos with a zoom lens, handheld without VR. It was a pain. It also suffered badly from chromatic aberration. This taught me quite a bit, and it made me a better wildlife photographer because I really had to be mindful of how I took the photos because I wasn't using great gear. Imagine if I always had great cameras and great lenses. I wouldn't have learned that if your lens suffers from chromatic aberration, that you've really got to be careful of where the light is coming from. Because if the light is coming from behind your subject, it's going to be a real pain for you. And getting rid of chromatic aberration is very difficult and at times impossible. This really got my passion going, say, finally, I have a camera, and although the lens isn't good, I have a lens that is going to allow me to photograph birds in action, not just stationary birds. And at the end of 2018, I sold the Takina 80 to 400mm lens and I bought the Nikon 200 to 500mm f5.6 lens, which is a dedicated wildlife lens. And this is where my wildlife photography really took off. Having learned to use an 80 to 400 lens without VR, and now with the 200 to 500, which had VR, which was great lens that I could track birds with through the sky, I was now able to take great bird in flight images. But I feel that if I hadn't gone through the process of just using lenses like the 75 to 300, like the 80 to 400, I wouldn't have learned that tracking a bird is difficult with or without VR on your lens. I feel that having basic gear really helped me appreciate my new gear that I had. Then in 2020, I finally decided to buy a camera that was specifically made for sports photography, for wildlife photography, which was the Nikon D500. And the Nikon D500, I believe, still rates as the best digital SLR that Nikon ever made for wildlife, for sports photography. It had 10 frames per second. It was so quick at locking onto your subject that photographing birds in flight, like this egret, just before it touched down on this tree stump here, was just so easy to do. But I still had to rely on tracking the birds manually. No bird eye autofocus, so I had to do all the work myself. And I kept this camera for 2 years, and I feel the only difference that I had over the years is that the cameras just got better with the autofocus and also with the reproduction of colors compared to in 2007. So I guess the cameras slowly got better, and I wouldn't say that it was a night and day transformation, but the knowledge to photograph birds didn't change. I still had to rely on my knowledge of using the correct shutter speed, using the correct aperture, learning how to focus, learning where to put the focus point on the bird, because my cameras weren't doing that. Then in 2022, I sold my Nikon D500 and I bought the Nikon Z6 II mirrorless camera. And at that time, quite a few people told me, well, you're nuts, Charles, because technology-wise, you're getting better, but for wildlife photography, you've gone backwards because you've left a camera that was purpose-built for wildlife photography, and you've gone to a camera which is a jack of all trades, great for landscapes, great for astrophotography, but just average for wildlife photography. But the reason I did this is that I'd started my YouTube channel and I felt that I really needed a camera that was great at capturing video. And the Nikon D500 that I had at that time, although it was good at capturing video, the problem was that it was a crop sensor camera. And when I went into video mode, it wasn't just a 1.5 crop of going to DX. It was a 1.7 crop to record videos. And also I had to rely on the LCD screen and rely on making sure that I kept the focus point on my subject. And it was just too hard. So going to the Nikon Z6 II was a compromise, but it allowed me to look through the viewfinder and track my subject when I was doing video. So I sold the D500, and since then I've had this camera and I've been able to capture amazing images. The sharpness of this camera is very good. And you can see here by this duck just jumping out of the water to land on the side of this lake here. I've been able to freeze frame it. And the Z6 II gave me the ability now of shooting at a very high ISO. This image here of a kingfisher just leaving its nest was taken at ISO 12,800, something unheard of back with digital SLR cameras. So this camera gave me the ability of doing all this. But remember that the Z6 II doesn't have bird eye autofocus, although it has a tracking mode that it can track a subject across the frame. I found that for wildlife, for bird photography, I could never rely on this to work accurately. So even today, it is a mode that I don't use for tracking birds. Capturing birds like this corella just about to land on the ground as it's feeding, little pied cormorant flying low across a lake. I hope you can see that even though I've bought better cameras, that my photography skills haven't changed that much. I've improved. I know that I've improved. My gear has slowly improved, but I've never relied solely on my gear to photograph birds, to get the shot that I want. And this is all I want to impart to you today. I want to share with you that now I could go out and buy the Nikon Z6 III, or I could go out and buy the Nikon Z5 II, which has bird eye autofocus, and the tracking feature on the Z5 II is very good. But I looked at, am I content? Am I happy with just what I have? And I have to admit that, yes, I am happy with what I got. Am I able to get all the photos I want? No. I'm 63 this year. I'm content with the photos that I take of birds flying across the sky. I know that my hit rate is only between 70 and 80%. And I know that if I upgraded even to the Nikon Z5 II, that my success rate would be close to 90%. But is that going to make me feel any better? I don't think so. My content would be, yes, I was able just to get a few extra photos. But that's not going to make me go out and buy that camera. I have the gear that I need for what I want to do. If you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up. If you have any comment or feedback about what I've stated in the video, leave it in the comments section below and I'll answer your question. Until next time, bye for now.